Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Here on the Cowboys' Tales we ride the stories of the West Campfire truths, trail dust memories, saloon whispers. Gritty humans, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. The wind came off the basin hot and bitter with sage. Elias Crow sat on the porch of Mesquite Flats and turned the Colt in his hands, cylinder clicking oil shining like a second sun on the steel. The boards under his boots held the day's heat. Somewhere a windmill squealed. His pocket watch ticked faint and steady against his ribs. Out on the flats, a mirage wavered. At first, it was only a shine on the horizon. Then it gathered into a boy in an oversized hat legs, churning dust throat working. He staggered at the water barrel, dipped the ladle, and drank like it hurt. "Slow," Elias said. The boy slowed, swallowed, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Freckles were ghosted under a crust of dust. "You, Elias Crow, sir." "Who is asking?" "Jesse Quinn. Dr. Pike sent me." He dug in his pocket and brought out a folded scrap edges gone soft from the ride. Said it was urgent. Elias took it. The ink had bled once under a wet thumb. His eyes traveled the few words and stopped. "Delaney Place. She is in danger, as you promised. Pike." The name curled like smoke in his head. Promise. For a moment, the porch and the wind and the ticking fell away. He saw canvas tents under a bruised sky, heard men calling for their mothers, smelled carbolic, so sharp it burned the eyes. A woman leaned over him in that memory fingers steadier than her breath. Brown hair, pinned back fatigue, kept at bay by will. May Caldwell. She did not ask him to live. She told him to. And then she drew the promise out of him like a thorn. Elias folded the note and slid it into his shirt. "When did he send you?" "This morning." "You eat today." Jesse shook his head. "Bread and jerked venison in the kitchen." "Take enough to get you home." The boy went in and Elias rose. The boards creaked. Cinder the black gelding flicked an ear in the corral as if he knew. Inside the air was cool and shadowed. Elias pushed a trunk with his boot until the lid caught the light and the leather showed its cracks. He lifted it and the old smell came up linen and ether and something like iron. He unrolled canvas and found forceps, a bone saw with teeth that had taken their share needles in a little tin. He held one needle to the light until it flashed, then set it in a leather satchel and closed the buckle. On the peg by the door hung his hat and the long coat that had kept rain off in better years. He took the hat. He took the watch off his shirt and wound it twice. Tick, tick. The sound steadied him more than prayer ever had. Jesse watched from the kitchen with crumbs on his lip. "Is it far?" "Far enough." "You going alone?" Elias looked at him. The boy's breath hitched like he might offer to go, and then thought better of it. There were two kinds of courage out here, the kind you showed and the kind you did not. "Tell Dr. Pike I'm on my way," Elias said. "Tell your mother you went straight there and straight home." "Yes, sir." Cinder took the saddle without fuss. The cinch bit snugged the leather warm from the sun. Elias slid the Colt into the holster, slipped the satchel over the horn, checked the canteen, and led the horse clear of the shadow. The first step off the porch cut something clean in him. He put a hand on the rail anyway. Habit. The basin lay open and white in the heat. Sage brushed his boots and left its smell on everything. A hawk seesawed above a line of cottonwoods, slow and sure. Elias nudged Cinder to a steady lope. The land fell away and rose a long breath of country you could vanish in if you were the vanishing kind. He topped a low ridge and saw it. Smoke from the Delaney place did not curl. It punched into the sky black. No wind bothered it. He tasted it before he reached the fence, a sour sweet that stuck in the mouth and meant a house going fast. He swung down at the corral and tied Cinder to a post that still held. Heat came in waves that clawed at his eyes and made the air ripple. The front door had gone in and lay like a tongue of char across the threshold. The windows on the south side were glass and frame and nothing else. "Anyone inside?" he called. No one answered. The fire did popping and throwing sparks that rode the updraft and disappeared into smoke. He pulled his bandana up and dipped it once at the trough and tied it wet over his nose and mouth. He took his coat and draped it over his head and shoulders, then walked along the wall to a small window that had not collapsed. Glass in the bottom bit his palm. He slammed the butt of the Colt into the sash and cleared teeth of glass with the coat sleeve until the opening was as wide as his shoulders. The smoke rolled out and wrapped his face in a smell of wet ash and old wood. It made his eyes water before he was inside. He went in feet first, then slid his chest across the sill and dropped. His boots found the floor and sank a little in something soft that had been rugs. The heat from the ceiling came like a hand on his neck. He got low and stayed there. It was a world of edges and red and sound. The fire spoke in cracks and a deep belly breath. Something above him groaned like a ship. "Hey," he called into that noise, "call back." For a beat, there was only the roar. Then he heard it, a cough that doubled itself and broke. Not a man, not old, a woman or a child. The sound came from behind the smoke and to his right where a hallway would be in a house like this. He crawled. Splinters drove through his trousers. He felt with his hands because the floor had changed. Boards there that held boards there that would not. Heat built at his back and a beam dropped behind him and threw sparks into his hair. He slapped them out without thinking and kept moving. The hallway narrowed. He hit a wall with his shoulder and left skin. His palm found a door frame, and then he was in a room that had been a bedroom once. The air was a fraction better enough to drag it in and use it. Shapes came up out of the murk where he moved them with his hands. A bed, a dresser, a bookcase that had gone down and pinned something underneath it. He put his shoulder to the bookcase and pushed. It lifted a breath and wanted to settle back. He shifted his stance and pushed again. The grit under his boots slid, but the shelf came up a hand's width. A hand slid out from under it, pale under soot fingers scraped raw. He grunted and lifted as far as a man could lift while bent and a body wrenched itself free. Up, he said. It was a woman. He did not see her face, only the shape of it under cinders and hair. She tried to stand and her right leg died under her. He trapped her under his arm. Her chest hit his ribs and his ribs felt every breath she took. She was light and heavy in the same way that people get when they are teetering. Window, he said. He did not know if the room had one. He banged his forearm along the wall until he felt the cool of glass. He put one elbow up to shield her, then swung the Colt again. The pain went with a spray of needles and a sound like a scream. Air knifed in. It was not cold, it was less hot. That was enough. He bunched himself and her at the opening. "Hold my neck," he said. Her fingers found his collar and dug there, and he took her weight and shoved it through until she slid out and fell into light on the other side. He looked back once. Flames found the ceiling and ran across it looking for a way down. The roof let them in. He climbed out and threw himself into the dust. He dragged her clear of the wall to a patch of ground where the heat was bearable. She coughed until she could not, then took a thread of air and tried for more. Her eyes opened and were amber under a mess of soot. They did not look away from his. He saw fear there. He saw something that was not fear standing behind it, hard and tired. A horse came up at a gallop and slid, and he knew the seat before he knew the man. Jonah Pike swung down and dropped beside him with his bag already open. Thank God, he said to Elias, and meant exactly that. He cut his look to the woman. "Lila Archer," he said low and fast. "Can you hear me, ma'am?" She nodded and held on to Elias with one hand like the ground might give. Pike's eyes flicked to the house and back. "We cannot stay here." Elias tied his bandana loose. His throat felt sanded. "You sent word." "I did. Archer put men on the road. We do not have time for talk." Elias slid his arm under the woman again. "Can you stand at all?" She tried and winced and swallowed it. For a step, she said, voice rasped. They moved. The yard was bright and empty of sound beyond the fire, which had its own voice and wanted all the space. Elias looked once at the black column rising and thought of a canvas tent and a young nurse's fingers slick with someone else's blood. The watch ticked against his chest, and the sound came through the roar, and the heat like a nail tapped into wood. Behind them, something inside the house let go with a long, tearing sound. A thin voice rose from the smoke inside the hallway they had left. "Help!" He stopped. He turned his head back toward the broken window and the red inside it. The voice came again thinner, not the woman he held. He set his jaw and shifted his grip on her. The heat pressed at his back. The porch steps lay there waiting, and beyond them Cinder tossed his head and blew. Elias looked at Pike and then back at the window. He put the woman into Pike's arms. "Hold her," he said. The voice called a third time, almost lost in the fire. He climbed back onto the sill and dropped into the dark. Smoke folded around him like a rough blanket. Elias kept low hands skimming the wall, counting breaths. The floor lifted and groaned. Somewhere a lamp burst and glass hissed in flame. The voice came again, a thread. He pushed into the hall, felt heat roll down from the ceiling, and shouldered through a doorway where the frame had held. A small shape huddled under a toppled table. Not a child, but a boy just younger than Jesse. Bare feet black with soot, eyes wide and wet. Elias got a hand on the table and heaved until there was a gap. The boy slid out on his stomach and clutched his leg. Up, Elias said. The boy tried, knees shaking. Elias hooked an arm, bundled him close, and went back the way he had crawled, keeping the bandana tight to his face. The window was a lighter square. He hit it with his shoulder. The sash splintered further, and the outside air came across his teeth, cool enough to make him drunk. He lifted the boy through, then hauled himself out and lay breathing dust. Pike had Lila under the cottonwoods. The boy rolled and coughed until he could cry. "Mama said run," he choked out. "I could not." Pike squeezed his shoulder. "Delaney Stock, I know your uncle. I will get you to him." The house folded in on itself with a sound like a sail ripping. The porch roof slid and went to ember. Pike jerked his chin to the fence. "We move." They got Lila to cinder. Her eyes were clear now, raw gold around the soot. She did not speak. Elias set her on the saddle and steadied her good leg against the stirrup leather. Pike gathered the boy to his own horse and swung up behind him. They rode out of the heat and the little square of yard into the open where the wind took the smoke and dragged it thin. No one followed. No one appeared on the road. Only the basin and the sky. When they reached Mesquite Flats, the windmill was turning like nothing in the world had changed. In the kitchen, the light bent across the table and made a pale square on the plank floor. Elias sat Lila on a chair and set the satchel beside her. "This will sting," he said. "Look at the edge of the table and breathe." She held still while he washed the cut along her brow with boiled water and carbolic. Her fingers tightened on the chair seat, but she did not make a sound. He set a needle and pulled the skin together. The thread showed dark against skin, pale under soot. He tied knots as small as he knew how and clipped them, then checked her wrists or ribs, the ankle she kept off the floor. He pressed along the bones until she flinched and then eased off. "Nothing broken," he said. "Ankle sprain. Wrap it. Keep weight off if you can." "Thank you," she said. Her voice had sand in it, for the house, for coming back. Pike stood near the door as if he did not belong in a quiet room. He dumped his bag on the sideboard and found bandage and a little jar with a paper label gone pale. Silas Archer did not send boys, he said. He sent himself. He wants control of Caldwell Wash. He wants her signature now that the railroad surveyors have marked lines through that country. Lila's mouth flattened. She reached for the mug of water Elias poured and drank slow as if the water could bruise. "He will say I am sick," she said. "He will say people must help him find me for my own good." Pike nodded once. "He is telling it already." Elias wrapped the ankle, making sure the pull of the cloth was even and warm. He tucked the end and touched her heel with 2 fingers. She did not pull away. He washed his hands in the basin, and the water went pink. He studied the swirl down the drain hole as if it would tell him something worth knowing. "You stay here," he said, voice level. "No one comes out this way unless they mean to. I will keep watch." Pike set the jar down and looked at Elias over the top of his glasses. "He will send more than a pair of drunks with torches next time." "I know." Pike rubbed at the grit in his beard. "I need to get the Delaney boy to his uncle, then go back to Red Hollow. Pretend this day was like any day. You will hear from me when I can ride again." Lila touched the rim of her mug with her thumb. "Do not risk yourself," she said. Pike smiled, with only one side of his mouth. "I have been risking myself since I learned to spell. Hold to the quiet for now." He ushered the boy out with a word. The door shut, and the house caught the silence again. Elias set a pot on the stove and fed the fire. Coffee gritted the air. He cut salt pork and set it to brown. Lila tried to stand. "Sit," he said. "I can stir a pot." "You can sit." She studied him, not in challenge, just weighing. "You live alone," she said finally, eyes on the clean corners of the room. "Everything has a place." "It does." "You like that. It keeps me from losing things." She let that stand. He poured coffee black as roof tar. She warmed her hands on the tin cup and took a sip. She winced and smiled in the same breath. The room smelled like beans and mesquite and wet ash from the outside. It felt full and empty at once. When she reached to roll her sleeve, the cuff dragged up to the soft skin of her wrist. Elias saw the blue ink there before she tugged it back. A small flower, 5 rough petals, the kind that opens to the night air. Evening primrose. The sight jolted him in a way he did not let touch his face. He looked away and set the plates. The watch ticked on his chest and found it steady. They ate. She did not waste movement even with the sprain tripping her body. He cleared the plates while she stood and found a cloth and wiped the table where coffee had slopped a little. He did not tell her to stop again. Words would not have moved her anyway. By afternoon, the heat pressed down like a palm. She nodded in the chair and then slept with her cheek on her sleeve. Elias went to the porch, set the chair where he could see the road and the low cut of the wash, and let the light move around him. The watch kept its own time. He let it. Cloud built over the mountains and then smeared apart. Toward evening, the light went copper and the wind died and came back from a new direction. A rider came out of that light and pulled up slow hands away from his holster hat, tipped back so a face could be seen clear. "Harlan Boone," the man said. "Jonah Pike sent me." Elias did not move the Colt from where it lay on his thigh. "How did he send you?" By his own voice. "I left him at Red Hollow 3 hours ago with a boy on his horse and a frown on his face. Here is what he told me to tell you. Archer has hired the Rook brothers. They work clean and they do not scare." Elias lifted his hand from the gun but did not invite the man inside. "You know them. I know their trail." Harlan swung down stiff, favoring one knee. Up close, he looked built of scraps that had all seen weather. His coat had dust baked into it. His eyes were a cold blue that looked tired more than mean. He held himself like a man used to being tested. "Why send you?" Elias said. "Because I refused Archer when he brought money to my door. Because I owe Pike. Because my girl coughs up blood some mornings, and the only man who will come that far into the hills is Pike with a bottle and a story to make her laugh. I know country where a man can be hard to find." The door behind Elias opened. Lila stood in the seam of light with her hair damp from washing the sprained ankle bound neat. Her eyes settled on Harlan's gun, then on his face, and stayed there. Harlan touched his hat. "Ma'am." She nodded. "You have a daughter," she said. It was not a question. Harlan's mouth moved once. 12. They went inside. Harlan stayed close to the door like a man who trusts a wall more than empty air. Elias set another plate and did not ask if he had eaten. The stew was simple and hot. Harlan ate like he remembered how to thank a cook silently. "Rook will not come to your porch first," Harlan said when the food was gone. "He will talk in town. He will set men at the freight office and the stage. He will buy whiskey for a boy who saw a thing he should not. Then he will draw a circle on a map and send riders to nibble the edges. They will find the Delaney place black and warm. They will ride the fences out this way. They leave prints a child could follow because they do not think they need to be careful." "In how long?" Elias said. 3 days if they are lazy, 2 if they have slept well and want to please the man who pays them." The house creaked and settled. A moth found the lamp and tapped itself senseless against the glass. Lila folded her hands on the table. "We cannot be here when that happens." Harlan nodded. "There are caves in the Juniper foothills. Apache used them before any of us had the bad idea to come this far west. There is a spring inside. I can take you. I can ghost your track so a fool could not find it." Elias looked at Lila. She met his eye and did not look away. "Dawn," he said. The wind shifted and hit the door hard enough to rattle the latch. The lamp flame leaned and then found center again. Lila drew the bandage tighter on her ankle with 2 fingers and tied the end. Harlan checked the load in his revolver and closed the cylinder. Elias wound the watch until the tick lifted through the room and set the tone for the night. They rode at first light. The ground held the nights cool for a mile, then gave it up to the sun. Harlan took the lead at an easy pace, eyes on the horizon and the shallow cuts that stitched the basin. Elias kept Lila in the middle. Cinder flicked an ear back for his voice now, and then settled into a steady lope. The air carried dust and a hint of wet far off, where the mountains held cloud. They crossed a dry wash that smelled of stone and old water. Quail burst from a clump of chamisa wings drumming, then vanished. Lila sat straight jaw set. The bandage under her trouser cuff made a pale ring above the boot. When the mare stumbled once on a rock, the line of her mouth flattened, then eased, and she found the rhythm again. By mid-morning, the land lifted into low hills dotted with juniper. The heat softened in the patchy shade. Harlan turned off a faint trail and threaded them between two bolted slabs. The passage narrowed until Elias could touch both walls with his hands. At the end of it, the rock fell back and made a pocket hidden unless you stood in the mouth and knew where to look. Cold air breathed from a darker crack at the rear. Harlan dismounted and slipped inside with a lantern from his saddlebag. The little flame gutted, then steadied. "Spring," he said from the cool. "Bring the horses slow." The cave opened wider after the pinch. The ceiling arched black and slick in places. The floor was sand and old ash. In the back, a trickle sounded like a watched clock. Elias led Cinder to the pool where water welled bright out of stone and ran to a narrow seam. The horses drank deep sides, heaving ears easy. They built a small fire in a ring of stones that had seen 100 of them. The smoke drew up a hidden seam and left the air clear. Harlan dragged brush across the entrance until the pocket looked like more hillside and less hiding place. Lila sat and unlaced her boot with careful hands. The ankle had puffed some. Elias brought the satchel and rewound the cloth, notched firm but kind. She watched his fingers work as if the motion might teach her something she did not yet have words for. He handed her a tin cup of water. She drank, paused, and drank again. A line of soot still ran along the edge of her hair. She wiped it with the heel of her hand and left a new smear. Then she tugged at her sleeve to push it higher. The cuff stuck. She pulled harder and the fabric slid and showed the inside of her wrist. Blue ink lived there small and sure. 5 petals, a circle in the center, evening primrose. The color had softened with time, but the shape had not. Elias felt a weight move under his ribs. He set the cup down before he dropped it. He did not say her name. He did not say the other name in his head either. He opened the leather satchel instead and took out the small wooden box that wore the same dust as the trunk it came from. He lifted the lid and unwrapped a square of cloth. The silver plate showed a young woman in a dress that did not belong to this hot place. Her mouth was set for work, not for smiling. Her eyes were alive. On the edge where sleeve met skin, the faint ghost of the same small flower lived. May Caldwell looked back at them from 30 years gone. The metal caught the firelight and made it seem as if she might shift and blink. Lila leaned closer without meaning to. Her breath caught, then came out slow. "My mother," she said. The word made a shape that filled the cave. "She held me to this world with her hands," Elias said. His voice did not try for more. "She told me I would keep mine steady for others." Lila touched the edge of the cloth with 2 fingers. She did not touch the photograph. Her eyes had wet in them, but she did not let them fall. She said the flower opens when the heat leaves, she said. That some things are made to find the dark and use it. Harlan watched without crowding the moment. He tipped his hat back and let the fire pick a line across his face. The trickle of the spring counted seconds no one bothered to name. They ate what they had brought. Dried meat biscuits hard enough to shame a tooth coffee with grounds thick as river sand. It tasted fine in that cool. Lila slept for an hour with her hand on her satchel and her cheek on her arm. Elias dozed in snatches that never quite became sleep. Harlan took first watch by the brush-covered entrance body, loose eyes awake. When they moved again, the sky had thickened in the west. A line of cloud wore a bruise color and dragged old light behind it. They cut across the foothills on game tracks and dry arroyos to keep their sign muddled. Harlan stopped now and again to brush out a horseshoe print with a sage branch or to lead them across rock where prints do not hold. The first drop hit the back of Elias's hand and spread a circle of dust that smelled like iron and green in the same breath. More followed. Wind came in a rush and died and came again. Harlan pulled his hat low and looked back over the rise they had just topped. He did not point. Elias saw it anyway. Riders. Far enough that the men were ink figures cut against a pale ridge. 4, then 5 when the last one lifted to match the others. They were not wandering. They took a line that would put them across the trail at the notch ahead. Harlan did not curse. He eased his weight into the saddle and set his horse to a faster gait. "There is a narrow pass," he said. "The other side drops into a box. If we are inside the mouth when they come, we hold them off. If we are not, we do not hold anything." The rain found its voice. It sizzled on rock and made dust into dark paste. The horses stretched and lengthened their stride ears forward, shoulders working. Lila's mare found the low way and kept to it smart for a tired animal. A crack tore the sky on their left and rolled overhead. The echo ran the length of the hills. The pass showed as a bite in a dark wall, not wide, not kind. Harlan threw his horse at it and was through. Elias felt the world narrow to rock on both sides. The smell of wet stone, the beat of Cinder's heart under his knee. The box opened on the other side, a shallow basin with a shelf of rock like a roof at the far end, and a narrow run of water that was becoming more than a run. Under that, Harlan called. He wheeled and slid off, left hand already on his rifle. "I will slow them." "I will not leave you alone," Elias said. "You will not. You will put her behind that rock, and then you will come here and shoot at the space between two stones until nobody wants to be in that space." A horse screamed at the mouth of the pass. The first rider pushed in. The second crowded his flank too close, eager, and caught a knee on the rock. He swore high and sharp and lost a stirrup, then found it. Elias drove Lila's mare toward the overhang, swung her down, and put her hand against the stone to steady her. He turned and ran low across the wet to Harlan's side. They fired and waited and fired again. The pass forced the riders to come two at a time if they wanted their knees in the same place after. That saved them more than skill. One of the rookmen went down with a cry that sounded surprised and bounced once, and did not make the second sound. Another slumped in the saddle and turned his horse with his body, without meaning to, until the animal understood, and pulled itself away. The rain did not just fall, it arrived. The little run of water in the bottom of the box lifted into a sheet that moved with a voice. Harlan shot, worked the lever, and shot again. He hissed and pulled his arm tight to his body. Blood leaked through cloth and made it darker. Elias saw the line of the graze. He did not have time to think about it. The sound changed. The water that had been running became water that was coming. It bore sticks and a bucket, and something that might have been part of a fence. The mouth of the pass choked with a wave of mud and flash that did not care about men or horses or guns. The lead rider hauled on his reins too late. His mount went over sideways, and the water took them and rubbed them hard against the stone. The next rider hauled back and let his horse scramble for height. The pass became a throat. The water filled it and spoke with one voice. No more men came through. Harlan pushed up and back to the overhang. Elias shoved him toward the rock, then dropped to the shelf where Lila waited with both hands on the mare's bridle to keep the animal from killing itself with fear. The flood ran brown and fast and loud, but the shelf sat just a man's height above it. Spray found them and stung like grit. Harlan's sleeve clung to his arm. Elias ripped it above the tear, poured clean water over the wound, and saw the bright of muscle, shallow but messy. He worked quick, cloth and a strip of leather to bind it. Harlan held still and looked past him to the pass and kept the rifle pointed even while Elias tied the knot. "Hot," Harlan said through his teeth. "You will live," Elias said. He checked the knot with a finger and nodded once. "If you stop bleeding on me." The worst of the water ran through as fast as it had arrived. It left the pass smeared and humming. Downed brush hung in the mouth like teeth. A rider on the far side cussed and tried to find an angle. Another one turned his horse away and chose life and whatever his brothers would say about it. They waited long enough for the edge to dull. Breath returned to the animals in slow draws. Lila's hands eased off the bit. Her eyes had the bright, flat look people get when they have ridden a slope in their mind that their body cannot forget. When the water dropped to a level that looked like reason, they worked the horses along the shelf and down to the floor, where it spread shallow and went away. Mud clung to everything. They found the outflow and followed it as it bent and broadened. The sky kept up a steady fall, less furious than before, enough to clean their tracks for them. By late day, the valley opened. Cottonwoods gathered where the creek flattened. Willow Ridge sat on a low rise where the mud would trouble wagons less. The street held light in long strips caught between clouds. Smoke lifted thin from a few chimneys. A freight wagon clattered past with its tarp dark from the rain. No one on the boardwalks paid them much mind at first glance. Harlan pointed with his chin to a house set off the main run, a little 2 stories paint-tired, but clean a sign that read, Parker House in neat hand. Rooms here, he said. No questions that cost extra. Inside, the woman who ran it looked them over like she priced them and decided they were worth the trouble. 2 rooms. Meals if you paid. Hot water now if you wanted it. Elias counted out coin and did not look like a man with less or more. They took the back rooms that looked over a strip of garden and a chicken run. Lila stood at the washstand and dipped a cloth and rubbed soot from her face that the rain had missed. Clean skin showed under the smear. The cut above her eye held well. She sat on the edge of the bed for a breath, then stood. Elias did not tell her to lie down. He found his shirt with fewer holes in it and changed. The watch ticked on the table with the same heart it had in the desert. Harlan went out and came back with the air of a man who had walked past the stage office and not lingered. Coach to California in 3 days, he said. Morning run. Folks are talking about weather and prices, not about us. Rain slid down the window in long, clear lines. The street outside ran thin with it. A bay horse shook and sent drops out like beads. A man stepped into the street, looked up at the sky, and laughed once with his head back. Elias stood where the curtain did not quite meet the frame and watched the light fade to a color the basin knew well. He did not plan out loud. He let the room settle and the noise of the house make its small home sounds. Hoofbeats came on wet boards, slow. 3 of them spread just enough to say they did not love one another. The riders moved down the street with their hats low and their collars up. They did not glance at each other. They glanced at doorways. One of them touched the brim with a finger as if to settle it. The bay under him rolled an eye to the side and showed white. The riders kept on past the hotel and the feed store and let their eyes do the work. The rain made a soft curtain. The shapes went through it and kept their shape. The room held its breath without meaning to. Harlan left with the rain still fine in the air. He took the alley behind the livery and was gone as if he belonged to the boards and the barrels. Elias watched from the curtain while Lila sat on the edge of the bed and shaped her breath around the ache in her ankle. The watch on the table ticked without hurry. He returned near dark coat shining, wet hat brim dripping. He spoke low. Rook. 2 of them and a stringy local who knows these streets. They show a sketch in saloons and ask in quiet. They are not sleeping under roofs. They are waiting. Lila set the laces of her boots straight and looked up at him. If they search rooming houses, they will come here. Mrs. Parker appeared at the door with a lamp and a measuring look. You will not bring trouble here, she said, or you will pay for the chairs you break and the glass you put holes in. Elias met her eye. We came for quiet and we will hold it. She weighed that, then set the lamp on the dresser. I have a trunk of things left by widows who went farther west. Black wool, modest cuts. If a lady needed to travel without questions, she could. Lila's hand stilled. Her eyes moved to the window where the glass made the street a gray river. Harlan watched her and said nothing. They worked by lamplight. Mrs. Parker laid out a dress the color of cinder and a hat with a small veil. She found gloves narrow and old, and a shawl with a fringe that had survived a dozen washings. Elias brought his better shirt from his bag and a jacket that did not smell like riding. Harlan scraped his beard in a bowl and came away with a face that looked tired in a different way. He polished his boots and left his hat plain. Lila stood before the mirror with the dress against her. She fastened the row of buttons with her left hand and then with both hands. The fabric fell clean from her shoulder to her knee and made her look like a woman who had kept many things to herself. She slid the gloves on. The evening primrose lay hidden under the kid leather. She touched the place where the ink lived as if she could feel it through the glove. Elias adjusted his collar and saw her watching him in the mirror. Widow Crow, he said, trying the sound. Her mouth shaped a breath that almost became a smile. Mr. Crow's brother, she said. Partner to Mr. Boone. She took the hat. The veil made her eyes narrower and harder to read. The cut above her brow did not shout. It whispered in that light. They went down the stairs in a group as people who belong together do. The common room smelled like soap and stove heat and old wood. A trio of freight hands took one look and returned to their stew. Mrs. Parker nodded once and went back to her ledger. Outside, the rain had thinned to a mist that lifted the smells out of the street. Harlan took them past the stage office twice as if by accident, and then across to the Mercantile where Lila asked for mourning ribbon in a voice that did not shake. Elias stood near her shoulder and counted change under the clerk's eye. A man with a long jaw and a hunter's step turned his face and watched the movement of their hands, then drifted away. Harlan did not look at him. He looked at the slope of the floorboards and the way the nails held in the wet. On the boardwalk, a child darted across and clipped Lila's hip. She turned to steady the small body, and the glove on her right hand slipped a notch. The cuff of the dress tugged. The ink could have flashed there if the light had been kinder to men who hunted. Lila caught the glove between thumb and palm and smoothed it. Her breath went out. Elias shifted his stance so his shoulder closed that gap. The child laughed and ran on. They kept to their rooms at night. Harlan took a chair by the back stair and read a penny sheet he did not care about. Elias sat on the floor beside the door to Lila's room and let the watch tick in his palm. Somewhere in the house, a woman coughed. Somewhere on the street, a boot heel slipped in wet and a man swore soft. Near midnight, a floorboard spoke where it had not before. Elias lifted his head. Harlan looked at him from the dim, and his eyes said the same thing. The knob turned 3 parts of a turn and stopped because Elias's thumb was on the lock. Silence. Then a slow retreat and the smallest scrape, careful as a cat. Harlan stood and did not hurry. He went out the back and left the door open for air. He was gone long enough for the lamp to burn a ring on the oil. He came back with mud on one knee and cedar needles clinging to his cuff. Rook sniffed at the side window, he said. I left a trail to the old freight road south. A wisp of blonde hair on a nail from Mrs. Parker's brush. Enough to make a man curious in the wrong direction. Morning came clean and bright. The clouds had pulled their tents down and gone. The street carried yesterday's mud in a thin sheen that would not slow a wheel. The stage stood in front of the office with its brass numbers polished and its leather traces tight. The driver checked the pole hooks while the shotgun guard looked bored and ready in the way of men who know what can happen to a coach. People gathered with parcels and talk. A pair of sisters saw to a cage with a hen inside. A clerk from the railroad office whistled and then stopped because whistling seemed wrong near a woman in black. Lila kept her hands folded under the shawl and let the veil do its work. The cut on her brow had gone to that yellow edge that says healing. Elias took their ticket from the man with the pen and did not raise his voice. Harlan stood where he could see up one side of the street and down the other. The Rook men were not in a clump now. They were pieces of the morning. One leaned hip to a post near the assay office and watched with eyes that moved more than his head. Another sat without sitting on the edge of a hitch rail as if to rest a knee. The stringy local went in and out of a doorway with nothing in his hands but time. Lila's breath slowed until it sounded like the inside of a church during a long prayer. Elias stepped half a pace in so anyone watching saw a man in decent clothes who took trouble for a woman carrying grief. Harlan walked across the street and made a point of asking the guard what the road was like beyond the pass. The guard answered because there is a language of men who ride, and he spoke it. A cry snapped the air. A boy went down under a bale he had no business trying to move alone. The hand that fell pinned under the weight bent the wrong way and made a shape the body does not stand for. The boy's mouth opened and nothing came out, then a thin sound. Elias reached him without thought. He set his palm to the boy's shoulder and his other hand to the wrist, and he pulled slow and sure until the joint slid and stopped in its lane. The sound it made was clean. He wrapped the wrist with his own bandana and tied it snug. The boy looked at him with wet relief, and then with pride that he had not cried. People who had not been watching watched now, and not what the Rook men wanted them to. "Thank you, sir," the mother said. Her hand caught Elias's sleeve and squeezed. Lila stood a breath behind him, veil down, face quiet. The glove hid the flower. The shawl covered her arms, and the dress made her outline smaller than it was. The driver called the time. The guard climbed to his seat and set his hand on the rail. The coach door swung wide and the steps creaked. Elias turned and put his palm out for Lila. She set her fingers in his and lifted her weight up. Her boot found the lowest step. The wheel beside her was a black arc that smelled like oil and road. Across the street, the man at the post tipped his hat back with one finger. His gaze ran along her face the way a knife finds a seam. He saw the bruise at the edge of the hairline where the soot had carved a new angle. He looked down and back up, and the smile that touched his mouth was not kind. He pushed off the post and moved. Harlan shifted, and the shotgun guard shifted, and the crowd thickened by a sliver without meaning to. Lila's hand tightened on Elias's. She lifted her other hand to the frame of the door and stepped again. The man in the street came, fast eyes on the veil, boots loud on wet wood. The boot steps came quick. The man with the long jaw cut across the street in a straight line. The guard on the box lifted his shotgun a hand's breadth and let the stock rest again. Harlan moved as if he were only changing his view. A wagon hit the corner too sharp. The driver had a shoulder into the reins and a curse in his teeth. Two barrels on the bed gave up trying to behave. One rocked off its chocks and rolled. It hit a rut and leaped. The iron hoops sang. The barrel burst at the foot of the coach step, and water went everywhere in a cold sheet. It ran under boots and into skirts. It washed the dust from the coach wheel and splashed the long-jawed man to the knees. He lost a step. The crowd shifted, not much, just enough to make a wall out of bodies between him and the woman in black. The mother of the boy with the bandaged wrist went where her child went and dragged her neighbor with her. A team snorted and threw its head. The guard on the box barked a word and then another, and the stage rocked on its springs. Harlan put his palm out flat at belt height. Nothing hurried in it. The man's hand was inside his coat. Harlan's eyes were on that hand. The street found a new stillness that held a new sound. Water ticked from spokes and dripped off the edge of the coach step. The smell of oak and wet road rose in the steam. Elias stepped in and set himself where a man could not pass without touching him. He did not touch the colt. He let his voice carry to the edges of the moment. "Plenty of folks saw a boy get his hand straight," he said. "Plenty of folks will remember who wanted to stomp through that." The long-jawed man held Elias in his eyes the way a hawk holds a fence post in its eye when it means to leave with a rabbit. The local with him saw the barrel on its side and chose to scowl at the driver instead. The other Rook brother had not moved from his hitch rail. He looked at Harlan, then the guard, then the coach door. He did not look at the woman with the veil. He looked at the town's face like he was doing sums, and the numbers bored him. "Time," the driver called. "Board or stand clear." Lila lifted her skirt a hand and took the last step inside. The veil brushed the frame. She turned her head and looked back just long enough for her eyes to find Elias. He had a hand on the door rail. The watch ticked under his skin. He did not say anything. He did not need to. She gave the smallest nod and was gone into the dull velvet of the coach interior. The door shut and the latch clicked. The driver flicked the lines. The team leaned and settled into the collar. The coach moved slow at first, then steadier. The wheels threw a fringe of water. Faces turned to follow it until it reached the end of the street and swung out toward the open road past the cottonwoods. The sound of it carried and then thinned. The long-jawed man looked at the place where the coach had been. He breathed once through his teeth and rolled his shoulders as if he were cold. He tipped his hat at Elias, not polite. "Silas sends regards," he said. It came out like a promise meant for someone who had not asked. He put 2 fingers to his brim for Harlan without taking his eyes off Elias. He turned and walked back into the moving street with the local at his shoulder. Harlan let his breath out slow. He turned his arm and checked the bandage with his eyes. The cloth had held. He looked at Elias and then passed him to the mother and boy and gave her a nod he might give a church pew. She nodded back fierce under it. They stood in the wet a moment longer. The town picked up its small life where it had set it down. The driver of the water wagon slid off and wrestled the empty hoop into the bed and told anyone who would listen that the road had been laid to trap honest men. Mrs. Parker lifted her skirt hems a finger while she crossed from the door of her house to the boardwalk with a letter for the post. She looked at Elias and lifted her chin an inch. Her mouth held the shadow of approval and then lost it. Inside the stage office, a clerk set down a ledger and reached for a fresh stack of tickets. His pen left a spot of ink on his hand. Elias stepped to the express counter and set a sealed envelope on the wood. The name on it read Jonah Pike in a clear hand. Under it, the words Red Hollow made a line that knew where it wanted to go. By the noon pouch, Elias said. The agent weighed the envelope in his palm. Pike gets what comes through here, he said. He stamped a date on the corner and slid the envelope into the leather bag with the quick movements of someone who had done the same thing yesterday and expected to do it tomorrow. Elias walked out into a light that had gone bright after rain. Harlan waited under the eave with his hat tilted and his eyes on the flow of wagons. He flicked a cedar needle from his sleeve and watched it fall. Debt runs on a short leash, Harlan said. He glanced toward the express bag where it lay behind the counter in the shade. Pike reads fast. Elias looked at the street. A switch engine whistled somewhere far off where the rails cut through bottom land. The sound came clean through the air now that the rain had washed it. He felt the tug in his chest that the watch sometimes made when its spring caught and then freed. He reached for the leather satchel that held forceps and needles and a tin that had seen many fires. He set it in his hand instead of the coat hook where it usually lived. They went by Parker House and squared what needed squaring. Mrs. Parker counted coins and recorded them with her careful script. She slid a bundle tied with plain string across the counter toward Lila's empty room without a word. Inside the bundle lay the cinder dress folded quiet. Elias did not look inside. The paper rustled like leaves on a dry tree. On the boardwalk, a railman in a blue vest rolled a map and tied it with a strip of rawhide. A pair of elders argued softly over the price of a mule that looked patient enough to endure both of them. A boy with a bandaged wrist held a stick like it was a sword and saluted Elias with it. Elias returned the salute with 2 fingers and kept walking. They saddled in the lot behind the livery, where trees threw deep shade and flies made lazy circles. Harlan swung up on a horse that knew his weak knee and stepped off gentle. Elias put one hand on the horn and one on the cantle and lifted. Cinder set his feet and looked back with one eye. The watch sat steady in Elias's vest. The satchel strap creaked as it settled against the saddle. The road out of town carried last night's water along its edges in narrow ditches. The cottonwoods shone with a new green where their leaves had rinsed clean. Low in the brush, a scatter of pale blooms opened raw and new. Evening primrose petals thin enough to let light pass. They were not there yesterday. They were there now. They rode past the last house and the last fence. The basin opened in front of them. The sky had washed and hung itself up to dry. The air tasted like clean tin and crushed sage. Elias touched the satchel with his palm and left it there the way a man steadies a thing that will be used. The pocket watch ticked on small and exact, the sound of something kept in time and then kept again. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.